I am Vinnie Tortorich, folks. Your good intentions have been stolen, but don't worry. I'm here to help you get them back. You may be soft and succulent at the beginning of this process, but hang in there. Before long, you will be lean and mean. It's the Friday show. You know what that means. We bring in guys who are way, way, way smarter than me, and they drop knowledge on us. This guy I've wanted to have on the show forever. He's finally here. The end of the year. This might be one of the last luminaries we have on this year. We're recording this on the 11th. Probably come out right at the end of the year, which is a good time because in the new year, we have new starts. And, you know, everyone always they're looking, oh, in the new year, I'm going to get rid of these love handles. I'm going to lose 100 pounds. I'm going to do all of this stuff. But we never think about our mental health. And I think that's very important. We need to think about mental health. I look around what's going on in the world today, and it seems more and more important every day that this should be in the forefront. So without any further ado, we're going to be bringing in Dr. Christopher Palmer. He is a Harvard psychiatrist. He's done a bunch of research on the interface between metabolism and mental health. I like that. Georgia Eads, she's been on this show several times. She talks a lot about this. This guy's doing the research. He's a pioneer in using medical ketogenic diet in the treatment of psychiatric disorder. Try saying that 3 times really fast. But I don't even know what that means. So we're going to bring him in, folks, without any further ado, Dr. Christopher Palmer. Yeah. How's it going, Chris?
I love it. Thank you, Vinny. Thanks for having me on the show.
Listen, this might not be coming at a more opportune time, if you will. Chris, look, I'm like an old Indian. I put my ear to the ground and just see what's coming. And when I go through airports, because airports, that's when I'm generally outside of my quote unquote comfort zone of people I associate with every day. In other words, when I go to my local coffee shop, I see the same people. When I go to my gym, I see the same people. But when I'm in the Atlanta airport, I'm seeing society and they're up close and personal. And when you notice things like people walking around the airport in what seems like their pajamas and slippers, and I'm not being cute or funny here, back when I first started flying, and I sound like Gran Torino when I say this, you know, it was like, okay, I need to have a suit jacket for where I'm heading. I need to have a different outfit for on the way home. You had to have 2 outfits on a plane flight trip because you were dressing up, shoes with strings, belts, you know, sometimes a blazer, depending. And now people are wearing their jammies and bringing pillows and huggy bookies and everything else. You're laughing, but you know what I'm saying is the truth.
Yeah, of course. You've seen me on a flight.
You and I'm sure you're not doing that because you're the most dapper dressing human being I know. I see you. And Chris, now, and this is a very sad thing, and it's right now in the zeitgeist. This young man went and shot an exec of a insurance company in the back. Just cold-blooded murder on the streets of New York. And we have young people calling this guy a hero. This takes, okay, it's one thing on flights when you see people in their pajamas. But when you have a level of discourse where someone can shoot someone in the back, cold-blooded murder, and then young people are calling him a hero. Now we got to start wondering. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a million thoughts on it. It's such a complicated topic, and some people will want to try to understand the motive or infer a motive. And the reality is that shooting another human being, when they are not directly threatening your life right now, is really unacceptable in our society. That is the bottom line for me, is that, we have a justice system to, if somebody has done you wrong and they belong in jail or they owe you money or something, we have a justice system that hopefully gets it right more often than not and will do justice to that person. So even in those situations when you've been harmed by somebody, it doesn't necessarily give you the right to go shoot someone. I think it's getting so much attention and press. I mean, the reality is there are murders every single day.
Right.
And they're not in the press. They're not in the national news. This one's in the national news, I think, because it's the CEO of an insurance company, and everybody kind of knows like the backstory of, oh, this guy probably got denied coverage and he's getting revenge. And yeah, we're all pissed off about the insurance companies denying coverage. And so it leads to such a broad discussion, and it certainly raises the question. I mean, all of the shootings that we're seeing in society, this one is pretty dramatic. And again, like you said, there are some people cheering it on. I hope people aren't cheering on all the school shootings that are happening all the time. And, and all of the other kind of mass murders and people just looking for revenge or attention or whatever before they essentially commit suicide. I mean, a lot of those acts, the shooter goes in knowing that I am probably going to come out of this dead, and they don't care. They don't
Right.
care. It's just kind of like they think they're going to be a hero right before they die, or they're just going to take people out with them when they commit suicide. And obviously, those people have a problem and are probably not mentally well. So, I mean, those are extreme examples of the mental health epidemic. But going back to what you were saying, um, we really do have a mental health epidemic. And sometimes we can, I think, kind of joke about it and laugh about it. Look at all these people wearing their pajamas onto the airplane and hugging their teddy bear. And other times people are crippled by their mental illness. They can't go out in public. They have unrelenting depression. They don't want to get out of bed. They don't want to go to work. They don't want to go to school. They can't function in the world. They think they might be better off dead. And then all the way up to people who are just absolutely tormented by symptoms, ruminations, obsessions, hallucinations, delusions that are really just torturing them. It really is kind of like a living hell for some people, to have a mental illness. And the tragic news is that the rates of mental disorders across the board are skyrocketing. They're skyrocketing. They are going up exponentially year after year after year. And we have a crisis. I think most professionals don't understand what it's about or why it's happening, or most people don't understand that. And more importantly, they don't know what to do about it. And, what I'm here to say is we can actually understand this. We can understand the science. And there are a lot of things that we can do about it that we are not currently doing.
To that end, I don't think that any family or any person goes through life without being affected by a mental health issue. Like, personally, I don't have a mental health issue, but friends and family do. So
Yeah.
I don't think I'm not immune from it because I'm healthy. My mental health is fine. But I have family members, I have friends, and hell, it hit close to home with my stepdaughter, who was in a relationship when she first got to college that, you know, it got very scary. Unfortunately, that young man ended up taking his own life.
Oh God.
You know, and it was a situation where he was threatening to kill her and him. And,
Oh.
and we even went to the other family and said, hey, listen, take your kid out of school, get him help. And they were a very affluent family. And they said, Pshaw, we're going to leave him in school. And I'm reminded of this now. I haven't thought about this in several years. My daughter graduated law school and went off to New York, and she's an attorney now. She's doing fine. And this kid is 6 feet under somewhere. And I'm thinking, when I'm thinking of this Luigi kid, you know, he's from an affluent family, and people want to say, well, maybe he was denied healthcare. He's from one of the richest families in Baltimore, if not the richest family in Baltimore. I don't think money is an issue here. You would think that someone would have been able to grab this kid along the way and get him the help he needed before he ended up taking someone's life and subsequently ruining his own life. What say you?
Yeah, 100%. It, I, again, I think you made the point, and I want to come back. Even if you're poor, does not justify going and shooting somebody in cold blood when they are not threatening your life. Um, and it also speaks to exactly what you just brought up. He ruined his own life in the process.
Yeah.
He threw his life away. Like, if you are upset about insurance, or if you're upset about some issue, do something about it. Absolutely. Fight for it. Like, become an activist, call legislators, campaign, do whatever, boycott, like lots of things that you can do. You don't have to throw your life away. And you certainly don't have the right to take someone else's life. And, I would say that there's good reason to believe that if somebody were to try to have a rational conversation with him about what he was thinking, why he did it, it will likely come out that he does have some type of a mental health condition, and that he probably is not thinking rationally, and that he has a lot of distorted views or paranoia or something,
Right.
something that is just not adding up. And I've not examined him as a psychiatrist. We're not supposed to diagnose people based on news, media, all that
Right.
kind of stuff. So I'm not going to start labeling diagnoses or anything. And I don't know for sure that he does have some psychiatric diagnosis, but I would say it pretty looks like somebody should consider that possibility. And again, it's tragic, because if this was just a rare isolated incident, it would be one thing, but we're hearing about, like, the school shootings actually are becoming no longer the lead story. Oh, there's and in other news, there's another school shooting down in Oklahoma or over in Indiana or over in Boston or wherever, another school shooting. Only 2 people were killed this time, 43 injured, but whatever. Let's move on to the weather now.
Yeah, you see that Chris, that's the problem right there. Only 2 people were killed, right? Because okay, wait, you didn't beat Columbine, you didn't get close to Sandy Hook, you're not a news story. We're there to where human life is lost. If one kid is lost, that's huge, right? But it's like, wait, it didn't beat Columbine, we're not close to Sandy Hook, only 3 people died, we're good. It's not even a topic, right? And that's how sad it's become. So my question becomes, and I've heard you say this because I love watching you when you're on stage and doing speeches. When you ask psychiatrists, the MDs in the room, the grown-ups in the room, how does this start? You guys, you would say, we don't know, right? We don't know how mental illness start. Or do we have an idea? Do we have some kind of inkling as to how it begins?
I mean, right now, I have very strong views based in decades of science, and I'll talk about them, and I can walk everybody through that if you want me to. But
Absolutely.
right now, the standard answer in the mental health field, if you go to a psychiatrist, if you take your child to a psychiatrist, and you know there's something wrong, you know this isn't normal. This isn't the way this person used to be. Like this, my son was fine up until last year, and then all of a sudden, for the whole year, like things are just spiraling out of control. They're just getting worse and worse. Just like you noticed with your daughter's boyfriend. Like it wasn't just a one-time thing. You noticed over and over, there's something wrong with him. This is not okay. He needs help. This is a serious problem. And if you go to a psychiatrist and say, what exactly is causing this? Most of them, if they're honest with you, will say, yeah, no one knows. It's just too complicated. All we know are risk factors. And they'll usually use the phrase biopsychosocial if they're a good psychiatrist. And that acknowledges that there are biological, psychological, and social things. If you go to a kind of bad one, I would argue, they'll say, oh, is there any mental illness in the family? Everybody's answer to that is yes, by the way. And if your answer is no, it just means you got your head in the sand about the mental illness in your family.
Right.
So everybody's answer is yes. But the psychiatrist will ask you, is there any mental illness in the family? You will say yes, because everybody should be saying yes. And then the psychiatrist will say, oh, I'm sorry, it must be genetic. Must be
It
genetic.
sounds like a cop-out, right? Is it a cop-out?
It, you know, I think the people who call it genetic have good intentions. And it is based on something that seemed logical 20, 30 years ago, and prior. So for decades, for centuries actually, we have known that mental illnesses run in families. And so if your parents have it, you're more likely to have it. And the assumption largely has been that, well, then it must be genetic. Like that's how traits get transmitted from parents to children, is through genes. And so it must be genetic. And that's why our field was filled with hope with the Human Genome Project. Everybody thought, finally, yay, we're going to get some answers. What are these genes? What are they doing? Let's develop cures for mental illness. We are finally going to eradicate mental illness. And when all is said and done, what the Human Genome Project really tells me as a clinician and scientist is that genes are not the primary cause of mental illness. Now, that doesn't negate the fact that mental illnesses can run in families. They do still run in families, but it does not seem to be genetic. Instead, it is likely epigenetic, because epigenetics can be transmitted from parents to children as well. And for a clear example of this, if people don't get it, the clearest example is obesity. If you have two obese parents, you are much, much more likely to be obese yourself.
Right.
And everybody assumes, well, it's because your parents are lazy slobs, they're overeating, and so they're just having you overeat. It's actually more complex than that, because if they give you up for adoption at birth, you're still more likely to be obese, even if you're being raised by Vinnie Tortorich and he's got you on an NSNG diet. You're still more likely, you're still more prone to become obese. And so, and I don't mean to say that we can't use diets. That may have not been the fair kind of analogy, because if you actually use an NSNG diet, you might actually prevent the obesity in the person. But if you let them eat whatever they want, they're going to be much more likely to develop obesity. And so what it says is there's this whole field of epigenetics, the hormones and stuff that are flowing through your mom's body are flowing through you as you're developing as a fetus in her womb. And that is actually having an effect on you. It has an effect on how you're going to go through life in the world. And it just primes you for that. And those aren't genes, those are epigenetics or hormones or other things. But those same factors are almost certainly driving mental disorders at the same time.
So let me just add this icing to your cake. Our good friend, Dr. Robert Lustig, has, he's mentioned this in speeches and his book. I can't remember which book. But when we were kids, I'm older than you, but when I was a kid, no one was fat, right? So you didn't see as much morbid obesity in toddlers and young kids. And he would say that because everyone is being, the parents are fat and the kids are getting these bad diets through the mother because she's eating the wrong foods, that they're genetically predisposed at birth to becoming fat people, even if they were removed at birth and put into a home with me and Serena where they're eating the perfect diet. We're still dealing with a kid who now the genes have changed. Is that possible? Is that a probable thing? Or just in 2 generations? I mean, we're not talking that many generations.
It's not that the genes aren't changed, but the epigenetics are changed, meaning there are chemicals or molecules that can connect or latch on to chromosomes and specific genes that will turn them on or off. So the regulation of your genetics can change, and that can drive you to be more predisposed to developing. So basically, for all of your listeners who are familiar with insulin resistance, for example, or stress hormones, it can change your set point, so to speak.
Right.
It can make it so that you're much more likely to be insulin resistant, even if you're doing most of the things right. Like, you can't get away with any mistakes when you've got that loading. Whereas somebody else born 100 years ago who had no obesity in their family at all, they could get away with eating all sorts of junk food and probably burn most of it off and be fine because their epigenetics are hardwired for leanness and thinness so you can run away. And because all of this stuff is prepping us ultimately to survive in the world. And and part of our survival mechanisms are to determine whether we are lean so that we can run away and get away fast, whether we're strong, big and strong so we can fight, whether we're overweight, and overweight is about storing energy and in case there's a famine or something. And so it gets complex fast, but those epigenetics, at the end of the day, a lot of people think about them as disorders or problems, but they're likely, if you go way back in history, there's probably an evolutionary advantage. At some point in history or another, there was probably an evolutionary advantage to passing some of these traits on to children. What's clear today is that we have a chronic disease epidemic. Yeah. And that there is no evolutionary advantage to this. The lifespan is beginning to decline now. More important than lifespan to me is the human suffering. People are suffering. They are, at best, they are just burned out a little more than they should be. They're brain fogged a little more than they should be. They're, and at worst, and then it kind of goes up to they're chronically depressed. They have anxiety for no reason, all the way to they're having hallucinations and delusions and they're tormented.
Is it my imagination? And I want you to think about this. We're going to take a quick break, but after the break, we're going to come back on this. Is it my imagination that if I looked at a graph, this has gone up like a hockey stick in the past 3 to 5 years of more and more people being mentally ill than before? Because it seems like we were just kind of running along and then, somewhere around 2020, everything just skyrocketed. I want you to think about that for a second while I tell everyone we're going to take a quick break here and we will be right back. Folks, Villa Capelli is the best olive oil on the planet. I bet Dr. Chris Palmer would tell you that if you got really good olive oil in you, that's not a bad thing. Here's the problem. In the United States, because of our lobby system and everything else, you're able to cut olive oil up to 40% and still call it 100% pure olive oil. I am not making this up. You can go look this up, folks. As they say, you can go Google that. You want the good stuff? Villa Capelli, they're the longest running sponsor of this show. Villa Capelli olive oil, longest running sponsor. You want to get your hands on this stuff, go to VinnieTortorich.com, click through to the Villa Capelli banner, or go straight to Villa Capelli. Either way, put in promo code Vinnie, VINNIE, for 10% off. Promo code Vinnie, VINNIE. 20. I said 20%. I'm sorry, wrong ad. 10% off. So scratch that. You want 10% off, go put in promo code Vinnie, and you'll get that 10% every single time you go to Villa Capelli. We're back. We're talking to Dr. Chris Palmer. Chris, there's more questions than answers here. Right before the break, I was talking to you about, it seems like things have skyrocketed. I blame the pandemic. I could be out of my mind for even saying that. Sometimes I wonder, and I hate to talk politics, and I don't talk politics on this show because it doesn't help anyone. But I have friends with Trump derangement syndrome. Love him or hate him, the man, people, you just mentioned Trump and they seem to lose their mind. I hear about incels. I didn't even know that term existed, involuntarily celibate, whatever the hell that means. You hear about all of these different issues and it seems to just be stacking on each other. Are these things real? Is there such a thing as Trump derangement syndrome? Are there incels, guys that want to get laid, but they can't? Therefore, they go shoot up the school or whatever they do. What's going on out there? And is there a way we can look into this or fix this problem?
So I'm going to pull back from these more politically charged concepts, and I am going to just say, for the record, what is clear is that the rates of mental health conditions or mental illnesses across the board have actually been skyrocketing for decades now.
Wow.
But there is no doubt that the pandemic accelerated this problem. So, but the rates were actually steadily rising even before the pandemic. The rates of depression, anxiety disorders, the rates of substance use disorders, especially opioid use disorder, the rates of deaths of despair have reached an all-time ever recorded high, even higher than the Great Depression. Even higher than the Great Depression. The rates of autism have quadrupled in 20 years. The rates of ADHD have tripled since 2010. But again, make no mistake, the pandemic accelerated it. It didn't just, but it was going up even before the pandemic.
Why? Is there a why in there? Or how? I guess.
In my mind, the why is about putting together a tremendous amount of science, decades and decades of science, but here's the soundbite. At the same time that the rates of obesity and diabetes are skyrocketing in our population, at the same time that 93% of American adults have one or more abnormal metabolic biomarkers, 93% are not completely metabolically healthy. At the same time that those things are happening, so too are the rates of mental illness skyrocketing. And it is not a coincidence. It is about putting together detailed science to understand that whatever is causing obesity, whatever is causing diabetes and prediabetes, whatever is causing all this high blood pressure, whatever is causing all of these abnormally high triglycerides and abnormally low HDL cholesterol, whatever is driving that is also impacting the human brain. And when the brain is impacted, how does that show itself? How would we know? It comes out as symptoms of mental illness. And that is why we have skyrocketing rates of mental illness, because the human species is increasingly being harmed by our environment. And when I say our environment, I mean writ large. So it food supply, water supply, environmental toxins, pollutions. Take your pick, take all of them, take one of them, whatever you like, but something in that list, or all of those things in that list, are slowly but surely poisoning the human species.
Chris, I'm I'm a very positive person. I wake up every morning and think it's going to be a great day. Just hearing that makes me go into a bit of despair. It's
Yeah.
like if you talk about food, you talk about water. We need both of those things. We talk about air quality. We talk about the plastics. And when I say plastics and air quality, we're talking about the environment, right? How do we fix any of it? We can fix what we put in our mouth, but it's really kind of hard to fix the water unless municipalities get involved. And how do we know what's in the water anyway? And how do we know what's in the air? And how do we know, any of it, right? How do we fix any? If you were to fix one thing, if you were to tell people you're going to fix one thing today, what are you telling them?
Get rid of ultra processed foods.
That simple.
If I have to choose one, I'm choosing that. And the reason is because food is the thing that we put into our bodies multiple times a day, every single day.
Yeah.
And guess what? Although we don't think of it that way, most people think of food as just, it's tasty, or it's got calories in it, or maybe it's got the macros that you want, and it's nothing more. But that food is actually being broken down, and it's fueling our body, literally fueling our bodies. It is literally being broken into the components to make new cells. So if you've got some abnormal chemical, some man-made chemical in that might end up in one of your cells, and it doesn't belong there, and it might mess up the way that cell functions. It's that basic. And so, yes, we're still breathing in stuff, but most of the air that we're breathing is relatively clean enough that most of us can get by just fine with that. The water, same deal. Most of the water is pretty healthy. It's relatively free, and I say relatively. Yes, you can find microplastics in all water, probably. You can find other chemicals but they're in small-ish amounts. So that I do believe that when people change their diets, they can achieve newfound health. It's not just I believe it, I see it in thousands of people around the world who are sharing their stories. You know this, I know this from our own personal experiences. And the good news is that I've been doing kind of a low carb NSNG kind of a diet for about 30 years because I had metabolic syndrome when I was in my 20s. And it has gone away and it has stayed away. And I don't take pills for any of that. And I'm fine. So I know that it's durable, that you make these changes, they can improve your health, and it is durable. Nonetheless, I am worried about those other things because I think those other things in tiny amounts are slowly but surely cropping up. And the clearest example, which is the new alarm, some people aren't even aware of it yet. Some people think I'm maybe being a paranoid conspiracy theorist, but microplastics actually are accumulating in the human brain. And they've gone up even since 2016.
Yeah.
People who died in 2016 had less microplastics than people who died in 2024. That's a problem. That's a problem. And what it tells me is that microplastics can get into the brain and then they probably can't get out. So once they get in there, they're stuck there. And your brain doesn't really have a cleaning mechanism to be able to get them out, or it's just not very efficient. And do we know for certain that that's causing problems? We don't yet. We don't have the detailed science for me to be able to say that. Do you need to be a neuroscientist to be able to speculate that maybe plastics aren't supposed to be in the human brain? And that maybe if you had the choice, you'd rather not have plastic in your brain? I don't know. Call me crazy, call me a paranoid conspiracy theorist, but I actually think I would prefer to have a plastic-free brain. Now, we don't have brain scans for this. I don't have any way to measure whether I've got plastic in my brain or not. I probably do. I'm one of the humans living on this planet. I'm not very happy about that. I don't know that there's much I can do about it. I do think that I can maintain pretty decent health. Am I in 100% perfect health? No, nobody is, but I'm in good enough health. Um, but I worry about our children because if microplastics keep accumulating and accumulating year after year after year, I think we might be creating a situation where it's going to be an uphill battle for them.
The first time I heard anything about microplastics, it was on this show, probably around 2014 or 15. And this guy, people thought he was a kook when he came on, Dr. Anthony J., who's from the Mayo Clinic. I don't know if you know Anthony at all,
Mm-mm.
but he wrote a book called Estrogeneration, talking about the estrogen in our bodies and the plastics and how it's, accumulating. And that was the first time I heard anything of it. And just, I want to say about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I had a scientist from Europe. I want to say he was from England or maybe Ireland. I'm trying to remember his accent. And he was kayaking around Greenland and Iceland, doing like this 3,000 kilometer kayak. And he was sponsored by a scientific group who said, hey, while you're out there, we want you to collect some seal poop for us, so we can study the seal poop. They found microplastics in seal poop at the North Pole. Okay, when you're finding microplastics in one of the most pristine areas on the planet, right? One of the biggest deserts, right off the coast of one of the biggest deserts on the planet, the North Pole, what chance do we have down here near the equator?
No,
Yeah.
no, I know that's the
Crazy.
thing that we don't. And when you think about, when you just look at the amount of plastics that we all go through, there you can't avoid it. You
Not,
can't buy anything. You cannot leave a grocery store without something wrapped in plastic. More than likely, almost everything that you buy from the grocery store will be wrapped in plastic. Because even if you're shopping in the produce section, you're putting it in a plastic bag to carry it to the checkout lane and to take it home. So plastics are everywhere, and they seem like such a good idea. If you go back in time, they're so cheap and they're so convenient, and you can just use it and throw it away, and it's great. Who would have thought? Nobody really had the foresight to think, wait, what's going to happen? Do these things like decay or degrade? And what do they degrade into? And for a long time, people thought that plastics didn't degrade at all and that they would just be stuck in a landfill for 300 years.
right.
Well, I think that would be the preferable option today because it turns out, no, they are slowly degrading and they're getting into the water supply. Like literally every ounce of water on the planet, like you just said, like you go up to the North Pole and it's in the water there. You can't escape it anymore. It's
Yeah.
ubiquitous.
Well, look, I because of Anthony J, my espresso cup is made, the inside is made of, ceramic.
That's great.
I only drink water from, metal containers. I never buy water in the store or anything like that. We filter water. We do all the things we try, but it doesn't preclude us from getting plastics. And people think I'm a bit of a freak because I won't drink from a plastic bottle or anything else. But, I'm a cancer survivor, so I'm trying to do everything I can to make it as long as I can. So you try to do all the right things. And I know that I'm trying to do all the right things, and it's not nearly enough. It's not even close to being enough, right? And there's no way to cook these plastics out. They're there, and we are, right? And either as a species, we have to mutate and learn to live with them or not. And I'm
Well,
wondering if the or not will be what takes us down.
no, I think there is one other option, and maybe I'm being too optimistic here. But the other option is that we can look at this, we can understand it, and we can start doing something about it. You just mentioned several easy, common sense strategies that are available to most people to try to reduce their exposure to plastics. So people can start doing what you just outlined. In my mind, if microplastics really are as harmful as I suspect they are, and I put emphasis on that if, because we don't have proof yet, but we could get proof pretty quickly. And I'm hoping with this next administration, under RFK Jr.'s leadership, that we will get answers to some of these questions. That if we find out that microplastics are in fact pretty toxic to human health, and they might actually be one of the explanations for why do we have this chronic disease epidemic, there are lots of things we can do. We could start banning certain plastic products. It is inexcusable that we sell plastic bottles for single use with
Right.
water in them, filled with water. Like you
Right.
can't get water from your home or from wherever. At a minimum, we can go back to glass bottles. If you need a bottle of water, let's serve it in glass, just like the old fashioned Coca-Cola or whatever. It comes in a glass bottle. We don't need to be serving it in plastic.
Yeah.
And so I think there are lots of strategies that we could start employing. We could start recycling plastics immediately, like really start incentivizing the recycling of plastics so that everything that's plastic, no, like nothing goes in the trash, that people make a lot of money by putting their plastic in the recycling bin, and that would allow us to at least stop producing new plastic. We could, if we really incentivize the price of plastic, meaning make plastic really expensive,
Yeah.
people will go out into the ocean and start fishing for plastic,
Oh,
and they'll
Chris,
start cleaning up the oceans for us.
if you had heard, folks, go back by 1 week from this show. We just did a show Wednesday. It came out today, Chris, where I was saying that if we didn't produce one more piece of plastic and just start recycling what we have, we won't have to produce any more plastic for at least 150 years. Because what most people don't know is we think we're recycling plastic by putting it in the trash. It's actually going on literally a slow boat to China, and then they burn it in China. You know, very little of it, like, I don't know, 2 or 5%, ends up being recycled. Most of it is being burned in a country. It's kind of like we did with, what was it? The COVID virus. We didn't want to make the virus here on our soil. So we brought the lab over to Wuhan, did it there, and then it escaped. We do the same thing with our plastic. It's like, wait, we can't burn it here. Okay, let's send it to a country that doesn't mind burning it for us. And then we feel virtuous for that. What we forget is that country, that continent is on the same earth that the rest of us are on, and it's using the same atmosphere. And when I say this, people say, oh, you're crazy. It's like, no, you can go look this up. As I always like to say, go Google it. Everyone likes to Google everything. You want to Google yourself right? Go Google this, and you're going to be shocked at what you learn. It's crazy.
Well, but the hopeful thing is what you said, that we can change that and we can start recycling that, and that we can, again, I think people, if we make plastic really expensive, people literally would go fish in the ocean for plastic,
Yeah.
and they would turn it in just like gold. It would be like gold mining, except we're plastic mining, and there's more than enough plastic to be had. So I think, that would be highly disruptive. Yes, it would be hard because people would have to change and all of that. But, I'm kind of silly in thinking that like the human species might be worth it. I don't know. Like maybe maybe it's a price to pay for the species survival, but
You
who
would think,
knows?
you would think, you would think. So let's give people, because I don't want to keep you forever. I could keep you for another hour. I know that you've done studies, and there's a word that there's a term. I wrote it down here. I never write down notes, but for you, I wrote a 1 or 2 word note. You talk about the use of changing people's mental health using a medical low carb diet, a medical ketogenic diet. What's the difference between a medical ketogenic diet and just doing what someone like Mary Newport says? Hey, just start eating coconut oil and eat high fat and call it a day. What's the difference, and how can people learn about this?
So in my mind, the difference is one of kind of really monitoring and rigor. And some people can just do their own version of a ketogenic diet, even to just lose weight, and they're winging it and they get lucky. Or they're really smart and they're reading lots of books and listening to lots of podcasts and getting a lot of information and really doing their homework, and they figure it out on their own. And I'm not here to stand in the way of anybody doing that. But when you're treating a really serious mental health condition like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or chronic unrelenting depression, more often than not, I see people who have not done their homework, who they think they're doing keto, but they're not really doing a rigorous version of a ketogenic diet. And for those conditions, some people need really high blood ketone levels, like in the 1.5 to 3.0 millimolar range. Um, that is not easy to achieve if you're just winging it. And
Right.
and my concern is that, even is that there are people who think they're trying a ketogenic diet, they're kind of winging it, and then they say, well, it didn't work for me, so I guess that keto thing's not going to work for me. And then they're back to this hopeless, helpless stance of there's nothing more to do. Like the pills don't work, the therapy doesn't work. I guess I just have to live with a chronic mental illness for the rest of my life. And I bring this up if this sounds kind of pessimistic or whatever, like, there are some people who think, oh, Chris Palmer, you're just trying to force people to go to doctors. Like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm really not. I'm trying to help people and help people heal and recover. But uh, I don't think she'll mind me mentioning and calling her out. There's a woman, Lauren Kennedy, who shares her story about living with schizophrenia. Her YouTube channel used to be called Living Well with Schizophrenia. And when I first went on her channel, she interviewed me a couple of years ago, right as my book came out. She actually had heard me talk about the ketogenic diet before and said, yeah, I tried that ketogenic diet and it didn't really work for me. And she had tried it for a couple of months, but it didn't really do much. And that was that. And she just kind of said, after a couple of interviews, she ended up getting professional help to do a medical version of the ketogenic diet. She has now achieved remission of her schizophrenia symptoms. She has managed to get off all of her antipsychotics and is thriving, is doing great. And so she's a perfect example of why I say medical version, because she tried it on her own. And she's a brilliant, smart, wonderful person. She did her best, but it wasn't a rigorous medical treatment. It was, when people do it for weight loss, it kind of sort of, the consequences aren't all that big of a deal if you don't lose weight. Like for some
Right.
people it can be, but whatever. I mean, it's not the end of the world if you don't lose weight on it. But when you're trying to put schizophrenia or bipolar or seizures into remission, it actually kind of is a big deal. Like your life, it might actually literally depend on it. And so I just want people to get accurate information, and I want them to have the best chance of recovery.
Just to put a bigger microscope on this, folks, I live in dietary ketosis because I try to keep my cancer at bay. But I also work out a lot, so I eat a lot more protein. So protein will lower your millimolars, the amount of ketones you have running through your body. So when I wake up in the morning, if I measure my blood, my millimolars will be between 0.3 and 0.7. 0.7 is really high. It's usually 0.4, 0.5. If you said, Vinnie, in the next several days, we want you to wake up and we want you to be over 1.0, or as Dr. Palmer just said, 1.5, I would literally have to eat 75% fat. I would have to cut protein down so much to get there. And by the way, it does feel a lot better when you're higher. It's just crazy. Your energy levels go up, but you're literally talking probably about eating 70, 75% fat to be in that level, right, Chris?
It does depend on the person. So for somebody like you who is relatively thin, lean, absolutely. You do have to start approaching those kind of ratios.
Yeah.
The good news is if you're overweight or obese, at least early on, while you've still got all those fat stores on your body to tap into, your body can tap into those. And so they might be able to do the diet you're doing now and have sky high ketones because they just have so much body fat that they can tap into.
Yeah.
But at some point, even those people, they lose that body fat. And then they do have to, if they need therapeutic ketosis, they do need to start increasing the amount of fat that they're consuming in order to maintain those levels.
Do you ever recommend that people take exogenous esters, ketone esters at all? People ask me about that all the time. I'd like to know what your head is on that.
I have tried them. I've recommended them to patients. I've certainly tried them myself. They might be good for athletic performance. They might be helpful to some people in some situations while they're trying to adapt to a ketogenic diet. Or possibly, although I have not seen this firsthand, in theory, if somebody's on a ketogenic diet, kind of like you just said, I can only get my ketones to 0.4. I can't seem to get them higher. Maybe taking some exogenous ketones on top of that might be helpful to them. But by and large, the answer is no. Exogenous ketones do not do the same thing that being on a ketogenic diet does. And why is that? It's because the ketogenic diet is lowering your insulin levels. It's changing gene expression. It's changing your gut microbiome. It's stimulating mitochondrial production and recycling, and it's doing all sorts of things. And if you eat a donut and then swallow a bottle of ketones, you're not getting most, if any, of those benefits
Exactly.
other than some ketones.
Yeah, I thought about playing with it with VO2 max because, Tim Noakes is a friend of the show and he's probably done more studies. He actually got trained athletes to 85% of their aerobic capacity using not exogenous ketones, but using just a high fat diet, being in dietary ketosis, which we never thought possible. I'm an exercise physiologist, and I would have said 79, 80% tops. He got people to 85 or 86%, which is well into top of zone 3, getting close to zone 4. And I was like, I wonder if I could play with ketones, exogenous ketones, and play with sugar, but I would have to go take baselines of myself in a lab to see where my VO2 max is now, and then play with it at home on one of my various pieces. I'm pointing over there because I have a lot of equipment in my gym here to see if you could play with that. But then I went, Timmy's doing all the studies. I'm not, and I'm an old guy. I'm probably not going to get there anyway, but it is interesting to see where people can get. And you're right. You can't, it's kind of like people who take statins, right? You're going to artificially lower your your cholesterol levels, and you're not really fixing anything. As a matter of fact, I would argue that lower cholesterol doesn't mean healthier person. Our brains need cholesterol. Everything, every cell in our body needs cholesterol. Yet we have a whole industry out there trying to lower something to make us healthy. Do you have any thoughts on that, Chris?
That honestly, that one gets so controversial. I think that for people who have ridiculously high ApoB or lipoprotein little a levels, that they are at increased risk for cardiovascular disease.
Intelligence
So
Parkinson's, folks, is what he's talking about. But go on, Chris.
lowering those types of lipids that often get lumped into other cholesterol levels, lowering those type of lipids can be helpful to reduce risk for cardiovascular disease. You are correct. Cholesterol gets vilified way too much. That in fact, cholesterol is essential. It is a backbone of cell membranes. It is a backbone of really important hormones like testosterone and estrogen and cortisol and others. So cholesterol is not the evil villain on its own. And in fact, if you're really worried about heart attacks and strokes, you should probably be most worried about insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. Because if you have that, your chances of cardiovascular disease are much, much, much greater than if you have high cholesterol or high LDL cholesterol.
And
Um,
I'm sorry, go on.
no, go ahead.
Most of the cardiologists I have on the show will say that the ratio of a high triglyceride, which comes with a high carbohydrate diet, also adds to that perfect storm of getting cardiovascular disease versus
Yeah.
cholesterol alone. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, high triglycerides, low HDL cholesterol, those are part of metabolic syndrome. Ironically, LDL cholesterol is not one of the criteria for metabolic syndrome.
Yeah. Chris, where can people find you and get help from you? And if you don't mind mentioning your books and everything else you have.
Sure. So my book is called Brain Energy. You can get it on Amazon or wherever you want. Uh, you can go to my website. I've got two websites, brainenergy.com. So you can get a lot of free information there. We've got a free newsletter. You can do a self-assessment. You can do all sorts of things there for free. And we've got a lot of the podcasts and news articles and other things all listed there. So you'll be able to see this one there when it releases and others. And then I've got another website, chrispalmermd.com, that has maybe some of the more academic research articles that have been published, especially along the lines on the ketogenic diet for mental illness.
Folks, go check him out. Brainenergy.com, the book by the same name, Brain Energy. And go check out chrispalmermd.com. Both. This man can really give you some help. Chris, hang on, because we have to wait for all of this to blah, blah, blah after the show is over with. Folks, you know what to do. We all go shopping on Amazon. Before you go there, please go to VinnieTortorich.com. Click through the banner. It puts coal on the fire, gets our train down the track. We're able to keep this show free for a gazillion years in a row, and we can bring you people like Dr. Chris Palmer. So please go and do that. Rate and review the podcast, blah, 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 blah. So on behalf of Dr. Chris Palmer, my name is Vinnie Tortorich. Put life into living and do it with enthusiasm.